So in considering this topic, I think we first have to understand, what is good company culture and why is mission-driven culture important? We know having a great business culture can have a tremendous impact on the effectiveness of your business. You have lower staff turnover, attract better talent, improve the credibility of the public image of the organization. But how do you establish culture, nurture it, promote it, and implement the values that attracted people to the company in the first place, especially if you're a company with limited resources and can't pay for expensive employee perks? So joining me today are the founders of a few food startups, exceptional food startups, that have been very intentional about establishing a mission-driven culture and are here today to share their successes and failures in creating it, and particularly one reflective of their core values, all the while engaging their team members around the company's mission and purpose. So thank you to all of our panelists for joining us today. I'd like each of you to introduce yourselves, and to spice up the intro, I thought it could be fun to just add, aside from your name, company affiliation, and what you do, what your favorite job was and why. So Alex, why don't we start with you?
Sure. That's a tough one. So Alex Gould, Director of Business Development with Protis Global here, sitting in Delray Beach, Florida. The favorite job, I'd say the most impactful job I've had, I'll start there, was back in the early, I'd say 2012 through 2018, my wife and I had a series of restaurants and food trucks in Southern California. And although super fun, we had a great time, but really impactful to watch people develop and curate themselves and cultivate into leaders of other companies, leaders within our company. That was a lot of fun and really rewarding. From a fun perspective, when I was 14, my neighbor owned a restaurant in the Bronx, and she would bring me in and she would let me bartend. So I couldn't really see over the bar, but I was pouring what I thought at the time were probably spectacular cocktails. I'm not going to say the name of the restaurant because we don't want to get anyone in trouble, but that was certainly a lot of fun at 14 or 15 years old for sure.
Great, thanks, Alex. I could see where the seed of interest in the food industry started. All right, Ayeshah, would you like to go next?
Sure, I'm Ayeshah. I'm the founder and CEO of Dixie Foods. Most interesting job, I'd say it was a short stint, but I had my career in corporate America for about 14 years and I was getting really burnt out. And right before I started Dixie, I decided to take a stint at a startup called Venga. And they were a restaurant technology startup that blended consumer data collected via this Venga app, and it was linked to your open table reservation. So it would start keeping track of the wines you ordered and your favorite entree, the day of the week that you go. And I think it was the most interesting because that's the first place where I saw how a startup had to actually create their own company culture, create their own systems, create their own departments from scratch. And it was a fascinating experience and a really interesting experience, given it was a really small team. So a lot of fun.
Great, thank you for that. Okay, Michael.
I've had the luxury of having a lot of really cool jobs. Yeah, my name is Michael Selden. I'm by background a biochemist. I run a company called Finless Foods. What we do, we make alternative proteins focusing on seafood. So the idea is to make seafood that has no mercury, no plastic, no environmental destruction, and no animal cruelty, and created via cellular biology and plant-based technologies rather than via dragging it out of the ocean. I really enjoyed being a high school chemistry teacher a lot. No, I really enjoyed being a Chinese translator. That was fun. I was co-editor-in-chief of a news website called China Smack, run out of Shanghai, and we got to translate the news from Chinese into English. And because I was editor-in-chief, I got to just see all the different articles going on, and it made me really read the news in a really voracious way in China. And the thing that I really liked was we also translated the comment sections. So it was more than just the news, but also the peanut gallery. And that was just a real cultural experience. I really loved doing that. And it I don't know, the whole mission of the website was basically to give English speakers a view into a part of the internet that we don't usually get to see, and to show that we're not really that different after all. And so I really loved the mission, loved the company, loved my coworkers. And yeah, I was really up on everything going on in pop culture for a little while. So that was fun.
Very cool. Thank you. And Nico, last but not least.
I'm Nico. I'm the founder and CEO of Willy Superbrew. we're trying to build an alcohol category around the idea of Superbrew, which is basically taking a hard seltzer base, packing in a pound of fruit, blending in superfoods, and making something that has like soul and flavor and depth to it. So my favorite job, I think, was in high school. I applied for this random internship in San Diego at the J. Craig Benner Institute, which is like a synthetic biology lab that's kind of famous, and didn't expect to get it all, but was just like, okay, I could maybe live in San Diego for a bit and surf before work, surf after work, and then work in the sick lab. And they accepted me, and I was like, it kind of changed my life a bit and pulled me down that track. And I pursued synthetic biology for a while, but it was just a really good situation. I had great bosses. I got to basically have a lifestyle that I didn't have living out of Boston, growing up there. And it was a really good job.
Great. Thank you. Well, thank you all for weighing in on that topic. And, I think in so many ways, those opportunities that we've had at different employers in the past really do shape what we then go on to create for ourselves and for other people. So very interesting to hear about those backgrounds for all of you. So jumping in to some of the questions that we've prepared for the panel today, I'd love to just start, quite honestly, with a bit of a definition. What is good company culture? What is a good mission-driven culture? I think it's a subjective term, so everyone kind of approaches it in a different way. But if we could start there, just elaborating on what that means for you and your company, and when you really started to actively think about it as something to establish and maintain, I think that would be helpful to set the stage here. So who would like to go first in answering this small question?
Happy to. It's funny you asked that direct question, because we actually were speaking about that here internally. And if you have a second later, Bert Miller, the CEO here, actually posted about this. So culture, I think, can be defined in multiple different ways. But I think how we view it, especially when we're working with our clients to get alignment, is what is that collective of core values mean? And then executing on them is really, from our perspective, how you define culture and measure it moving forward.
Great. Anyone else would like to weigh in, or maybe talk a little bit about how you define values?
I can jump in here because I think, first of all, I think especially in the food industry, you are having to solve a problem before you jump in, right? And I think in the beginning, you don't need to weigh in too hard into like, am I solving a world problem like hunger or deforestation, right? Let you start with the basics. Like, I mean, I own a frozen food company, right? And it wasn't like I was like, oh man, I'm going to change the face of frozen. It was really, I was disturbed at the nutritional makeup of biscuits in the market. And I thought people deserve better. And I thought it should have had a cleaner label, right? It starts with that. And then as you build the brand and as you build the company, as you build the people around you, you kind of naturally start to see what you really stand for. And with time in market and with the strength of your business growing, you can really start to put some meat on the bones and say, okay, this is really what we stand for. So perfect example, you'll get to meet my business partner, Ross, who kind of has been with me side by side for the longest time. But when we first started, it was just he and I. But what we noticed about ourselves were, one, there were no women in the baking industry, and there were no gay men in the baking industry. So we stood out like sore thumbs, and we decided that we wanted to change that. So that became part of our company culture, that at the base principle of who we were, diversity and inclusion was always, always, always a guarantee. So that really got wrapped into how we handled culture building in terms of hiring. It got wrapped into how we talk about ourselves. It got wrapped into how we even like collaborate with our team members. I mean, some people really want to just jam it out in 9 to 5 and they live their separate home life with their independent friends and family, and that's cool. And then there's people that dedicate their entire everything to being a part of the business. And that's kind of, because Ross and I are like that, everyone at the company is kind of like that. So it really does start to take shape as you grow. And I wouldn't put too much pressure in the beginning to formulate all that idea. Just formulate the process to allow for it to grow organically in your organization.
I totally agree with that. I think like in our progression, I think you're describing like stage 1. And then stage 2 is like kind of the collective group to buying into the same values and deciding what the values are of the company. And once you do that, then it gives you kind of a compass for hiring and for people's behavior that's kind of in the intangibles. It's not the like performance-based, hey, did you hit this number by this date, but more, did you do it in the right way? And I think that's the next stage, is really like, once you know your values, you hire for them, you call each other out against them. As a leader, you try and model them. And if you do that, then you can build a culture where people feel like, you know, everyone's playing by the same rules and you can support each other. And I think a good culture really is, do people know the values and live to them? And do they feel supported in the company and feel like energized and charged, and there's a community behind your company? That's, to me, what culture is.
Mhm.
Yeah, agreed with everything everyone is saying. Haven't left me a lot to say, actually, but I mean, it's a big topic, I guess. So there's a lot of things. I mean, I think a good company culture should create a very inclusive environment, but it also should create a space for understanding who does not belong in that. Like, your company culture should attract people as much as it repels certain groups of people, certain like ideas that are not fitting for what you are. Like, you know, when we're interviewing candidates, like some questions that get passed around are like, is this person going to stick up for their female coworkers in uncomfortable situations? Is this person going to stick up for their LGBTQ coworkers in uncomfortable situations? If it doesn't look like that, they're not a good fit for us. And like, that's a thing that is just as important as figuring out who is good. It's figuring out who is not going to work with your company culture. And then, I mean, beyond sort of like D&I stuff, which is obviously super core to us, like, but, you know, Finless is filled with people who are super type A. And we've realized that, like, you know, type B people fit in less well a lot of the time. And we're just like, do we embrace that, or do we try and change that? And it's just like a constant conversation of like, what should we do? You know, so we're looking for people who are advocates, people who are going to agitate, people who are going to push the company forward in a really proactive way. And like the stage that we're at, the size that we're at, people who aren't a good fit for us right now. So, you know, it's just as much about defining like who works with the company as it is, and who doesn't at the stage that you're at.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, and something companies should be just as aware of in terms of what they are looking for in terms of attracting employees, and what they're not looking for in terms of attracting employees. So one of the things that I think is so interesting is, you know, you may be able to find people that really align with your mission, right? There's so many people out there, especially today, that are bought into the idea of a better food system and wanting to work for companies that have a positive impact on the environment, health outcomes, sustainability. There's no shortage of that enthusiasm out there. But how do you really translate that purpose, which you all possess in your companies to some extent, into sort of the daily interactions and how you manage a team? It's, you know, oftentimes so much part of the brand of the company, and, you know, the onboarding documents and the code of conduct, but how is it really carried through over the course of time? Can you talk a little bit about how you think about infusing that within the day-to-day?
I can start because I went last on the last one. Yeah, it's hard. I mean, especially for like a high-tech company like us, like we have scientists who are just stuck in the lab, and like they don't get to see like the bigger vision of the company very often. So it's really important to like proactively, as a co-founder, an executive, as a manager, to try and drag that mission out of the real world and pull it into your company as much as you can, and like show people how much they're appreciated. Like maybe you got like cool write-ups in the news. Maybe people aren't looking at that. Like you have to post that in the Slack. You have to actively engage people with it. How do you remind people what they're working on and what the mission is? We're trying to save the ocean. You know, it's like, yeah, maybe you're doing a histology experiment. Maybe you're trying to crack a cell open and see the protein content. But how does this pull into the bigger picture of we're trying to save the ocean? So, you know, it's important to like build SMART goals at a big level and to break them down to people so that actually people have like concrete tasks that they can work on. But it's just as important to also give feedback from the top and like explain to people how their work is affecting, like, you know, the quest for investment, the like public facing stuff that we're doing, the way the public is perceiving us. Make it really clear that like no matter, at least for us, like no matter who you are at Finless, like if you're taking out the trash at Finless, you're taking out the trash at Finless, and you are just as essential to the things that we do as me or anybody else on the team who's like at a higher level. And like to try and infuse that into everything is really complicated and really difficult. And it's a proactive process, and it's kind of like a fight, honestly. Like it has to be a thing proactively done on a day-to-day basis. It can't be passive.
Mm-hmm.
Michael, I completely agree. I think enabling the team, giving them that responsibility, and really allowing them to take ownership of however big or however small, they are part of that wheel. They are that cog in motion of keeping things in play. And I think what you just said was completely accurate, and to allow your team to feel part of the bigger goal, no matter what their role is. is going to be huge in creating that culture and creating that sense of ownership in whatever it is that they're doing.
Great. Any other panel comments on this topic? Go ahead. Okay. Well, as I'm listening to you speak, I'm also thinking about the differences in, pre-COVID work environment, which was very focused on, perks and employee benefits and bringing people together around food, free lunch every Thursday or Friday, or in some companies every day, and sort of these like engaging gatherings where I think you got a little bit of that, kind of carryover from the day, and people can kind of, hash out things in a more casual kind of way. How have you done that now in a digital world and with a remote workforce, which so many startups have adopted for one reason or another to save on overhead, or, just because people prefer, a more work from home style. How has that, kind of translated? Are you bringing in people to inspire the team to talk on, kind of this broader topic and this broader industry that you're working within, or doing other things to kind of drive that culture and remind people about this bigger ecosystem that they're influencing through the work that they're doing at your companies?
I mean, I think for us, one of the biggest things is offsites. Like we did one, a month ago that was just incredible, having the whole team together and just having that charge. I don't think you can replace like physical interactions and the energy of that. But I think bringing that into a smaller scale as well, we're trying to do that with like working together just in like random coffee shops tomorrow with a couple of people on our team, or like going into our office in Boston, or like our sales team is very distributed across the East Coast. So it can be difficult. So then we basically build little hub and spoke models, I think. And I think that interaction in person is the strongest thing to bring people together. But then we try and do a Monday call, or we do a Monday call every morning where people talk about their fun things that they did over the weekend or last week. And it's actually like a really cool thing, because it's like, we get incredible stories from our salespeople about like someone cutting them off in New York traffic, and he like pretends to be mad and he just hands him one of our brews and is like, "You got some balls cutting me off like that. Here you go." Or like just hearing about people's baby that's coming, or like, and stuff that's like, it's, I think if you can build a community where people feel comfortable sharing the random things that are like personal in their life, and it's actually fun and interesting, that's the stuff that you would get in an office. And if you can enable that, that creates something where people want to work together and they're enjoying it. And I think that's the objective really most of all. And offsites do that, and hub and spoke things do that. And then ideally stuff like our Monday call does that.
And random opportunities for brand building.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other comments?
Yeah, I think that the pre and post COVID lifestyle, it brought to light a lot of, those perks and amenities at work. And yeah, I will challenge everyone here to a ping pong game. I will. I'll probably win, maybe. But actually, no, Lauren, I know you're a tennis player, so I'll probably lose to you. But I think it's more than that. It's about really the company outside of the perks, outside of the benefits. It's who will that company allow you to become from working with them. And those are the things, those are the traits that will allow the employee to say, yeah, this is somewhere I can spend the next, 2, 5, 10 years of my life, because they will get me to where I want to be personally and professionally. That's where I think a lot of the compensation pieces come into play, where it's just not as important as it used to be. They want to feel the passion. They want to feel fulfilled with what they're doing on a day-to-day. And yeah, lunches are great. Foosball tables are great. But if those are why people are going to work, there's a problem.
I also think it's more along the lines of thoughtfulness. I mean, every person at the company is an individual, and in a remote environment, it's really hard to have those engaging moments where you can feel appreciated, or that a high five is like right within reach, right? So they're working in the dark and literally not seeing progress physically, where, I mean, we've been at headquarters for a while now. So we've had physical interactions, we've had in-office meetings, we've had celebrations, so that FOMO is a really dangerous thing. So one of the things that, even before COVID, we've always been big on thoughtful gifts and employee appreciation packages, new employee hire kits, and not corny stuff. Like, it's not supposed to be a water bottle and socks. right? Like it's got to be like your brand principles and tenets packaged up in the most thoughtful way. It might not be swag they would wear. It's trinkets, it's symbolism, it's things like that. And then when people do awesome things, there's the benefits of COVID were all these really innovative gift packages, right? And customized gift packages and things that you can really say like, I think so-and-so did a great job. I know they like this. I want to show that I'm thinking about them this way. And I think it's really important because I think even, especially with COVID, people have worked harder than ever. Burnout is real and you have to keep motivation and support high. And no one's going to feel it unless they know that their managing team sees it and appreciates it.
Yeah. I love that. And I think that's a great suggestion for folks that are looking for ways to engage right off the bat. I mean, knowing your team and I mean, really teams are communities. You're building a community here. You're building a gathering of people that share these core interests and values and want to work with people that they enjoy working with. And so taking the time to understand, what those drivers are and really, engage people with them is very interesting to think through some of those employee touch points that can be had. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the interview process because I think it's such an important part of identifying not only talented individuals, but people that fit with your company culture and really do align with the mission. So can each of you touch a little bit on how you evaluate that in the interview process? What are you looking for when employees or prospective employees catch your eye and you have those calls? How do you evaluate it? And has it worked?
Yeah. So I mean, it has to be a multi-step process. Like we're very thorough in our interview. I mean, Alex knows, maybe too thorough actually, but there's always like a required culture interview where the questions are geared specifically towards our company culture and whether or not this person fits in that. And I think a really important thing that we've started doing that I'm trying to like teach all of us how to do now that we're doing this massive hiring sprint after raising our Series B is like trying to knock people off their narrative in the interview. Like most people have like a canned set of responses that they can use to respond to whatever you're going to say, and it's going to sound good. So like, especially in the culture interview, it's about like digging down and kind of asking the same question over and over again, basically in different ways to try and see if you can get a non-scripted answer, something that's actually sort of like indicative of the way they actually think about something, not something that they've rehearsed and said in every other interview. And I think, you can tell. I mean, you can tell the difference between a scripted answer and like a non-scripted answer. And I think it's important to get to those non-scripted answers if you really want to assess cultural fit.
And can you give us an example? Sorry if I could just jump in. Can you give us an example of a question that, might be kind of a curveball and not have a prepared answer that actually does give you that insight that you're looking for, Michael?
So that's the thing. It has to be a succession of questions. Like it can't be one. So like, something that I like to do is basically be like, why get into your field? Basically, everyone has a scripted answer for that, obviously. So then after they do that, they'll be like, oh, I work in food because like I cooked as a kid or something. And it's like, yeah, but everyone cooked as a kid. Like why you specifically? What was different? I'm like, oh, I grew up in like XYZ neighborhood and like we had this kind of cuisine and culture. And it's like, but a lot of people grew up in that and they didn't all do this job. So it's like, keep drilling down. Like, why are you special? Why are you unique? Because everyone has an answer to that somewhere that they haven't rehearsed. So it's just keep drilling down until you find something that's more like raw and real. This is one example of doing that, but it's basically ask the same question over and over again, essentially, to try and get a non-scripted response.
The Union Food Group has two good questions that I think kind of go in this direction, which is like, what was the last gift you gave? I think is a really good one for that, where it's like, you can actually see if someone's thoughtful and you can see like how they think about others and how they care about others. And it kind of throws people off because it's like not a question they normally get in interviews. And the other one is, who do you admire most? I think is a really good one for that because it kind of shows as well, like the values of the person and what they would put as like their pinnacle or their northern light. And I think it's the same kind of idea, like drilling down into questions is freaking exactly what you should do because it does pull people off the narrative, and any questions that are kind of like the pull people off as well, that's just a single one, I think will work as well.
Great. Any other feedback on interview questions as a way to evaluate?
Just leaning in on what Michael said, him and his team do such a great job of having that linear approach. We've worked with Michael on a few different projects, and when we meet with them on a weekly basis, what we hear from them is so consistent across the board whether it's in a group or individually one-on-one, that creation of thought process that he has embodied in his team really triggers a unanimous decision. And whether it's provoked or unprovoked, you can feel it when you're talking to the candidate, when you're talking to Michael or any of his other colleagues, but their approach is working. So that focal point of who are you, how to really expose that is really critical. And I don't think that there's a blanket question. It's really spending the time defining who you are as a company, what your values are, what your culture is, and how do you expose that? How do you ask those leading questions, those probing questions to find out who is at the core of this candidate? And will they be that person sitting in the same chair 2 years, 5 years from now?
Great. All right. So you've been able to attract the right employees. You've been able to select the best fits through the interview process. So we talk a little bit about the scale of culture and how it sort of kind of evolves over time as you continue to bring on new employees, try to get everyone on the same page around this set of values and ideals. Does it change? And do you find yourself having to constantly maintain it, bringing people back to the same ideas? Or do those ideas also evolve over the course of time and over the course of team development? Would love to hear how that's gone for you over the last couple of years of running your startups.
I can jump in if you want. It definitely evolves. Like we started at a farmer's market with like 3 friends, and now we're a team of 22. And as your team grows, I think people come in with different insights and different viewpoints and different age groups, demographic, everything. Like the key is you hire for different perspectives that still are on the same values. And I think as a leader, you have to adapt to that and make sure that people, I think the key is you give the energy and you keep people on the values. And if you do that, you're going to have to adopt people's structures for what they're bringing to the table as you keep going to say, like, how are we going to live to our values in the way that fits your lifestyle and the place that you're working from? So it's definitely a conversation, I think, every quarter and every day to just say, what's not happening here in your opinion to our, like, are we living to our values or not when we do this larger action, or when I speak to you in this way, or when this person represents it? And you ask for feedback consistently, and that's the way you adapt. Just keep the values on track, keep the energy there, keep helping people grow, and then get their feedback consistently.
Yeah, it's definitely going to change. Adding people and trying to keep your culture exactly the same, I think, is sort of like, fighting the tide. Like adding more people will definitely change your culture, and that's good. Just making sure that they are like adding to your culture, filling in weak spots maybe, and sort of like creating something new rather than like pulling it in a bad direction is the important thing that we've tried to keep in mind. And that's been really helpful for us. Like at the beginning of the company, our culture was very like, everyone's independent, everyone's doing their own thing, no one's checking in on each other, there's 5 of us, and it was sort of just like, all right, like everyone just get everything done and we trust you can do that. And then as we added more people, it was like, well, we do need a little bit of structure. So pulling in people who have a strong culture of like organization, structuring things, like actually, big company vibes, basically. That was really helpful as we move forward, as one example of it adding to our culture. So we always think of it as like adding to the culture rather than changing the culture.
We're actually going through an exercise currently here in our offices where our director of people is asking a handful of questions about what we know our culture to be. What are our core values? What's our North Star? And it's kind of shining a light of, hey, half the people don't know. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a flag, right? And we internalize that, we have that conversation, and we get people back on track. So to his point earlier, I think it is important to have those check-ins, talk to the people who've been there for a few weeks, talk mm-hmm. to the people who've been there for a few years, and see if there's parallels between them. And I think that will give, the leaders like Michael and Nico that understanding of, are we evolving? Are we degrading? Are we passing along our messages in the right way?
Yeah. Well, I'd like to quickly welcome Ross in Ayeshah's place. Thanks for joining the panel here, Ross. I know she had to exit, but I think one of the interesting things potentially for you to reflect on and for all the panelists is a continuation of this question, which is, what are those evaluation tools? And I think, Nico, you touched on it a little bit with these kind of like quarterly or more frequent conversations just around the topic and centering people's discussion around the topic of culture, what it means to them, what they want, how they're feeling about, company direction, interactions, and all of that. But, are there surveys? Are there other types of tools that we may be able to use to assess or take a pulse check on what's going on? Or even, third parties sometimes have come in to help founding teams with this. So curious if that's, if any of you have used any of those evaluation tools.
We still keep it pretty simple. At this time last year, we were half the size that we are now. We've more than doubled our team count. And just to kind of understand where everyone's at, we do weekly calls with everyone. But going back to what my business partner Ayeshah said earlier, like there's no replacement for in-person connection. So once a quarter, we try to get everyone into the office. And then we do lunches with each team member, just lunch one-on-one, so we can get honest feedback and have an honest conversation about what's going on, where they're at, how they're feeling. That's like probably one of the more effective ways for us to really gauge where our employees are at with the culture.
We've kind of run the gamut of like trying to do surveys and like keeping it really formal, going like big company style. And oftentimes it feels like that kind of stuff where everyone's doing too much sometimes to be like, hey, we're going to implement these HR policies and changes. It doesn't feel authentic. And so we've kind of moved back to, I think the biggest thing is if everyone in the company can try and model the idea of taking feedback openly and being vulnerable, then you can get the feedback quickly and you don't have to do it in a way where people are like, they feel like, oh shit, we're going through an HR review to change the culture of the company. It's more like, hey, are you living the values or not? Can you call me out if I'm not? I'm totally comfortable if you do. And if you do that, I think you're building something that's organically growing rather than something that's like you're putting boxes on your culture and everyone's kind of afraid to say things. And I think there are surveys and they are helpful because you can get big picture. What are you missing? Do people know the values of the company? Like that kind of stuff is really important, I think, as a check-in. But it's the more important, like the 80-20 of it is live to the values and make sure people feel comfortable calling you out on them.
Mm-hmm. Great. So I wanted to also talk a little bit about a topic that's just been so contemporary in every aspect of our lives, which is diversity and inclusion. What we know is that diverse perspectives and individuals contribute to a stronger company culture and more sustainable companies just in general. And so how have you been thinking about this for your organizations? And what are some ways that you've been successful at attracting diverse talent to your companies?
Well, we practice what we preach. Diversity kind of attracts additional diversity. I mean, like Ayeshah said, she's one of the very few women in the frozen baking industry. I'm the only gay man I know in this space. I've been operating in the space for 7 years now. And people know that we do have a reputation for being a very diverse company, and it continues to attract like very diverse hires. Most of our executives are women, especially women of color. We do have a lot of LGBTQ employees as well. At the end of the day, we just practice what we preach. Diversity, the more diversity you have, it seems like the more diverse candidates you seem to attract.
Yeah, just go ahead, Michael. Sorry, I've been talking a lot. Okay. I mean, we had the issue, we started this in college with like 3 guys. So it's very like white males from the Northeast kind of thing, which is not diverse at all, especially in the alcohol industry. It's like a male industry. And we definitely have seen that. Like our company's gone, 4 of our last hires have been female, and we're starting to move in a direction because we hired more and more diverse candidates, and because our company got the legitimacy and the size where it's not just like our friends saying, hey, I believe in your stuff. It's more like, shit, this is real. It allowed us to be more thoughtful about who we're hiring and build a more diverse company. And we've seen like the more diverse we've become, the easier it is to hire people who have different perspectives. So we went through the struggle of being like, we need to be more diverse, but like, how the hell do we do it? To being like, okay, we represent that. We make sure we interview against it. We post against, not just in the traditional brewbound or like beer industry forums, but very broadly in the job sites. And it's kind of that progression of like constantly focusing on it and chipping away if it's not something that you start with. That's what we found.
Mhm.
Yeah, not everybody is at like the stage where they can do this, but something that we've implemented as a policy is just an unbelievably aggressive like visa policy in terms of just like, if you want to work for us and we think you're a good fit, we're going to get you a visa. And like that's ended up in an extremely diverse company somehow, starting with like two, same deal, like white co-founders from the Northeast. So we were, starting off at not an advantage. But now at this point, we're a minority American company, like as in Americans are the minority at our company, where we have a good like gender balance. We have a massive representation, way above average of the LGBTQ community. And all this is proactive, like it's not passive. And that's like one of the most important things here. And it can't just be that like you're doing it in a perfunctory way. You can't be like, this is good for the company and so I'll do it. You have to genuinely like understand a lot, I would say, about like social justice and like what causes a lot of the problems that create like inequality and inequity. And I think without that, it's not going to quite work out. You're not going to quite end up with the diverse workforce that you want. So basically like, you can't fake it, I think, and actually succeed. But yeah, I mean, we have we always say that we're basically the UN. I mean, we have from all over the planet, from like Nepal to the Congo to like China, India, and beyond. We have a really cool team. We got to, we had an event where everyone got to like bring some food from their culture and just had this whole huge like dinner of all this like stuff I'd never heard of. It was awesome. It's really worth it, like for a million different reasons, to build a diverse company, and not just like because your company will run better.
Mhm.
We've also found, so we partner with nonprofits in the Baltimore and DC area, especially with LGBTQ homeless youth. And through those partnerships, working with those nonprofits, we've actually found some quality hires, especially in our pastry program. So again, it goes back to practicing what you preach. And if you're working with your community, you'll probably find some very high quality, diverse hires that, you weren't expecting to find.
And it's really promising to see right now. We're at the table with companies that are doing $3, $5, $7 billion a year. And then we're at companies at their infancy stage with 2 or 3 people. And it is always a conversation. And it's delightful to see people bring so much attention and awareness to it, and understanding that they have an education ahead of them as well. So it's really promising to see where the dynamics are with these entrepreneurs at all levels.
Mhm. Well, I think everyone, understands the benefits. It's just a question of, how do you do it? How do you do it well? How do you attract a diverse team, nurture a diverse team, kind of keep that as a core tenet of what you're doing and what you're building. So, there's a lot of need for guidance, I think, out there. And on the topic of guidance, Alex, I think it'd be great too for our attendees to hear a little bit just about, in terms of working with firms and third parties on helping attract talent and identify employees that are a best fit for their business. When should companies consider working with firms like yours? We know so many that, they're startups, they're early stage. They try to exercise their networks to find, the best folks to work with a team early on. But we know, with that first, maybe round of funding or that first, kind of initial amount of capital that companies are raising, they really have to show a lot in the course of, 12 to 18 months with the funds. And oftentimes that necessitates bringing on people that, people quickly that have, the knowledge, expertise, and network that can help them get to the goals that they, committed to. And so you talk a little bit about working with a firm like yours and when companies may consider it.
No, I think it's a great question, because I don't think a lot of companies at an infancy stage think about how they're going to put their financial model in and what resources they're going to put towards recruiting and finding the right talent. And I think, first off, VCs, investors, institutional capital, I think they would appreciate seeing that there is thought process going into, hey, they're taking what they're doing seriously, and they're putting the efforts into finding the right talent to protect the funds that we're putting in. Secondly, what we're seeing is people who have two real different buckets of needs. First being, is this a business critical position that we're looking to fill? Second, the timeliness, right? Do we have the capacity, the resources, the time to really put towards getting the talent we need in-house, and are we capable? Founders, CEOs, owners are extraordinarily good at what they do, especially so when they surround themselves with the people who may be outside of their circle. So I think, again, it's the life cycle of the company certainly takes into a big account. Whether or not they're ready for it, that's a decision they have to make, and it factors in, of course. You know, the financials are a big piece, but can you have that conversation with yourself of, can I alone get to where I need to be without the right team around me?
I think what we found as well at Branch Food and Branch Venture Group is so often you get, founders and entrepreneurs that don't necessarily have a food or sort of background. And so that network doesn't quite exist. And, though they may know people in a particular sphere, they're really trying to build a company in this industry that may not be as familiar to them. And so, the support there to help them connect quickly with others is, I think, game changing for a lot of entrepreneurs that know what they need to do and need to find the right people to help them achieve those goals.
It certainly is, and it's really important to find the right partner that can tell that story for you, if not as well as you can, if not better, in the market to find that team to place around you.
Great. Well, I do want to switch to questions from our group, and I know we've had some submitted already from the group of attendees, but before I let you, before we transition to that, last words of wisdom for companies and founders that seek to, identify, nurture, and attract the right talent to their organizations. Anything that jumps out to you as, oh, this is something that we did that was really important, it worked really well, or this is something that we did, do not do this. Any words of wisdom that remains?
One of the things that Ayeshah and I always like to talk about is, we've done the hiring since we started the company. You have to trust your gut. You always need to do a gut check. Sometimes we do not listen to our gut and we try to put a square peg in a round hole, and that person, that hire, worked out for a few months, but that problem that we tried to overlook presented itself and we had to deal with it later on. So Ayeshah and I, our rule of thumb is just always trust your gut.
Completely agree with that. I think it's like a lot of time in both sides, like when you're hiring people, I think a really good question to ask your group of interviewers who ideally have multiple people interview everyone, like always do that because you need different perspective. And I think a question you ask everyone is, if this didn't work out in 6 months, why? Because that pulls out people's gut feelings on it, and it'll be able to create that conversation. Even if you love the candidate, but they might have a warning flag in the back of their head that suddenly is like, holy shit, that's a really big deal. We shouldn't hire them for that. And I think it's the same thing with people on your team. If there's someone who you're like dragging a horse to water type thing to be like, you should be in this role, we really need you, and they're dragging their feet on it, oftentimes they don't want to be in that role. They're not going to do great work in that role. You can't force them to do it, and like trust your gut on that, because that burns culture too. If people are doing things for long periods of time that they're like, I don't want to do, or like they want to leave the company, don't try and force them to stay. You know what I mean? Be like, you need to move on in your life. Like you're burnt out from COVID. It's good. Don't worry about it. We'll find a replacement for your role. And I think that's a scary thing when you're a founder, to be like, shit, this person seemed perfectly critical for this role, but if they're not excited by it, they shouldn't be in that role. And it's always better to replace that person, I think, than to say, hey, we're going to force you here.
I feel like all the good stuff got taken. Yeah, I really agree with both of them. That's super important. I mean, like, hire slow, fire fast, kind of like if there's a question in your head of like, should this person be here? They shouldn't be there. It's a combination. Go with your gut on whether or not they should stay, and I think that's really been true for us. Every single time I've started to have that question and then was like, but let's like keep trying, I regretted it. And every single time that I had that question and acted on it quickly, I was really, really happy with what I had done there. Yes, I mean, like, go with your gut and don't let your company rot from the inside. Like, make sure that like this is a very well curated group of people. And also read. There's a lot of books on hiring that are out there that are good. I'm reading Hiring for Diversity right now. I think it's really great. I really appreciated reading Situational Leadership and the 1 Minute Manager. Great way to onboard people and to get them like slotted into their roles if you were fulfilling a capability that you're now onboarding for. Super important strategy for getting that done. And they're business books. They're written for business boys. They're short. They're all very easy and simple. So I recommend just going for it. It's like one of the most important things you can do.
Great. Well, let's transition quickly to questions that are coming in. So first question here from Karen. Can you talk about how you address conflict within culture between you and one of your employees or between teammates? Do you believe in the 360-degree feedback mechanism that is allowing for feedback coming from you as a leader? Who wants to jump in on that?
Yeah, we do 360s. Everyone's reviewing their manager, as well as your manager is reviewing other people. And what was the first part of the question? Sorry.
And I just deleted it.
How can you address conflict?
Addressing conflict.
Yeah, I mean, like, you know, as somebody, if you're essentially like in charge of your organization, you're going to be thrown into conflicts where you actually don't really know who is right and you don't really know what the answer is. And that's really hard. You know, sometimes you just have to make a decision one way or another and just try and make it something that's like forward looking, not punitive. You weren't there. You don't know what was going on really a lot of the time, unless you do. And like, there's no reason to try and guess, like move forward with people. And a lot of the time, it seems to me at least, conflict is like, there's a decision where there actually just isn't enough information and two people feel very strongly about like different directions to take on XYZ decision, and making a decision that's in line with your values is a good call. So having values that are written down that everyone knows that you can point to and be like, well, we value this, so this is the decision that we're going to make, really helps. And it solidifies culture in these situations. Because the reality is like, you know, if it's a decision that's coming to you, there probably isn't a right answer. And like, there isn't really a good direction to go in with it. So pick something that actually reinforces another positive thing. You know, fulfill one of your other goals of instilling your culture, even if you don't actually have enough information to make the decision the right way.
Great. Any other thoughts on conflict?
I think one key thing in conflict is it's okay to be called out on something and to be proven wrong in something in your company. Like, I think that's one of the most healthy things a leader can do, is to be like transparent when they were wrong and like, I made the wrong decision here, because then everyone else is like, okay, his job's fine. Like, it's okay that I made a mistake and like he's showing that to me. And I think that allows a healthy organism in your company. Like, the culture can actually succeed through conflict in a way that everyone's like, it's okay, conflict's good, it's fine. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And to build on that, I would also say just, you know, not necessarily always having the answers. You know, we think we're going to ask people around the table, like, what do you think? Like, what is the answer? What is next? And it's oftentimes a journey to get to the point where you have a stronger sense of that. It's not always, you know, people may not have the exact answer at that point in time. And it's okay to say that. And it's okay to feel that way. If you don't, you know, you need to put more time and effort into figuring it out.
Conflict can be okay. Like, you can encourage healthy conflict. It's when it becomes unhealthy, it becomes problematic. Like, you don't want everyone to be agreeing all the time, because, you know, then if you're going in the wrong direction, you need those dissenting voices. You need people to, you know, raise those red flags. So we encourage healthy conflict, but it's a very fine line between healthy conflict and then something becoming very, very problematic to the organization.
Yeah, I think you put that really, really beautifully, Nico. Having that humility to say, I was wrong, I was incorrect, but how do we make it right? And having that open line of communication without having people feel the aggression towards it is really impactful.
One of the other questions that we have here is a bit of a quick one that we can get through. How many people are in your organizations? And thank you for this question. I know you sent it anonymously, but maybe it would have been helpful to share that up front. How many people are in each of your companies presently?
We have 21 full-time employees. We have half a dozen part-time employees, and then we have probably 9 or 10 consultants that work with us on very specific projects, but 21 FTEs. Yeah. Again, most of those hires were in the last 6 to 8 months too. So
Great.
Pretty much same. We have 20 full-time people and then maybe like 30-ish like consultants / part-time people.
Yeah, we're 22 and have a mixed number of consultants. We have people part-time. We're doing samplings and stuff. So it's probably about 15 now, but it kind of fluctuates up and down, 5 or 10.
And how many are at Protis these days, Alex?
We have around 20, and we are currently onboarding, hopefully onboarding about 8 more in various roles over the next 6 months or so.
Great. All right, so one other question that we have here is sort of related to the question around diversity and inclusion earlier, but a little bit more specific. The question is, COVID has inspired people to pivot in their careers to completely different paths. How do you think about diversity of experience, particularly in your hiring of these types of people? So people bring different experiences to the table. How do you think about bring people like that to your organization?
well, I mean, we definitely hire from different industries. So our director of supply chain and planning, actually, she just started about 2 weeks ago. She worked in Nestle, but before then she did procurement for Audi USA for 8 years. And actually it was that institutional knowledge of working in a big company, understanding systemically how supply chain demand planning worked is one of the reasons why I wanted to hire, not because of Nestle experience, but because of the Audi experience. So for us, like we look at different industries. We you know, if someone has the right skill set, we're industry agnostic with the hires, but you know.
Funny, we actually also just hired a supply chain person 2 weeks ago who we also got from Nestle. So that's strange, but hopefully it's not the same person. Yeah, I mean, like, you know, something that you can do just as a tip, I mean, like, it's hard because we have a lot of really technical roles and you really do need to have like experience in that exact thing. I mean, you're either a cellular biologist or you're not. You either have a PhD in bioprocess engineering or you don't. But, you know, for other roles that are a little bit more general, it's good to sort of like try and as much as you can remove experience requirements from the JD. Because basically if you have an experience requirements, like you need 5 years of experience in like X thing, like white guys are going to say they have that, whether they have it or not. They'll be like, I mean, we will be like, yeah, that's fine, I'll figure it out. Whereas a lot of other people are questioned a lot more often on their experiences and credentials. And so like non-white men are basically going to be a lot more likely to actually listen to that and be like, well, I don't have that very exact thing. So I'm not going to apply to this role. So if you want like a more diverse applicant pool, being a little bit vaguer or softer sometimes on your requirements will inspire people who've been told no very often in their lives due to their identity, that they can still apply.
Especially when it comes to college degrees too. Sometimes like your role really doesn't need a college degree, and so remove it from your job description. We do that all the time. I prefer experience over a piece of paper for non-technical, more general positions. I put that caveat out there.
I love this question and I love all the answers. I think it's super important, especially for people looking for work, not to be deterred by, I don't have this, I don't have that. Worst case scenario, you don't hear back or you don't respond, but you have to try. And I think from where we're sitting now and the climate of the market right now, people want different vantage points. People want to see where people came from and how they could think differently and more creative. Yeah, I think this is a great question. I think we could talk about this for hours, but I really think people should not be scared to jump into a new world simply because they may not have the 2, 3, 4 years of experience or 10 years of experience or the title. If you're good at something and you have that skill set, that translates.
Great. Well, last question from me. Are you hiring? And if so, for what roles?
We're hiring for a deduction specialist right now, which actually does not require a college degree, because I was like, we'll get the ROI on that position very quickly. So if you want to do that, come on board. It's not a fun job, but someone needs to do it. So
It's good marketing, Ross. You won't have fun, but you're with us.
I mean, like you gotta be down and dirty to do it. It's yeah.
We're hiring for a brewer, like innovation brewer, in Q1. That's probably our next hire.
We just closed our Series B, so we're hiring 50 people. So I'm going to list every single one of those off right now. I'm not going to do that. You can go to finless.rippling-ats.com. I can put it in the chat. We're hiring everything. I mean, from bioprocess engineer, we need policy and impact managers, cellular biologists. We're hiring a lab manager, operations people. We're hiring a COO, a director of marketing. We'll be pulling in salespeople, social. Yeah, that's not even kind of everyone, but I'll put it in the chat. Please apply. We're very desperate.
Great. Well, I know we're a minute before time here, and I just want to say thank you to all of the attendees that tuned in. Thank you so much to our panelists for all of your forthcoming commentary on this very important topic. And thank you very much, Alex and the Protis Global team, for supporting this conversation. I think it's an incredibly important one, especially in today's working world. So thank you all for your engagement. As a quick reminder, please do check out Branch Food and all of our upcoming programming and work at branchfood.com, as well as our work at Branch Venture Group if you're fundraising and at the early stages of doing so. We're looking forward to seeing you all at a future event, hopefully one day in person, and really appreciate your engagement over the course of the last hour here. So more information to come via email. We'll send out those links, and especially the links to these open positions that our panelists just mentioned. So thank you all and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Adios.